Welcome to our sixth webinar of the 2019-2020 PLP Pathways webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about students as partners. And before we begin, we'd like to thank the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education, Shelburne Farms today, and also the Middle Grades Collaborative for the work they do supporting us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay Hallman, who's going to be our host for the day.
Hello, I am Lindsay Hallman, and before we begin, it seems as though the proper thing to do would be to have some introductions.
Taylor, I teach middle school language arts and social studies at Main Street Middle School in Montpelier.
Hi, I'm Maura Wheeler. I'm the Proficiency-Based Learning and Technology Integration Coach at Lamoille South Unified Union.
Hi, I'm Kevin Peely-Hunt. I teach Swift House and Williston Central School.
And
Hi, I'm Meg O'Donnell. I teach humanities, 7-8 humanities at Shelburne Community School.
And we are joined by two amazing guests today for our topic. We have...
So I'm Wendy Halleck, and I teach with Meg O'Donnell at Shelburne Community School. And today I'm participating at Shelburne Farms in a Cultivating Pathways for Sustainability professional development program.
Hi, I'm Jen Cirillo. I work at Shelburne Farms as our professional learning coordinator.
Okay. So the topic of today is on students as partners. And just to begin, before we get into what that looks like in the field, in the practice, let's ground ourselves in the theory. I would offer to all of the contributors to chime in at any point. So we actually we're just coming off of a big discussion about this of youth adult partnership and what that looks like. And before we get to the what, the why, the most important piece, as we were discussing today, is that in order for us to truly understand what partnership is, that we really need to explore the mental models of both the adults and the young people, the youth, in schools around what does it mean to be in partnership and what does that look like. I thought this could be helpful to frame the what we're talking about here today as far as partnership. There's a lot of different ways in which folks might call it or go about it in school. Some folks think of it as student negotiated curriculum. Some people might call it student-centered learning. But if we're really thinking about partnership, then this might be a way to frame it. So at Up for Learning, we use this metaphor called nourishing the seed or seed to tree. And it starts with understanding that the seed, from a scientific perspective too, a seed has everything it needs inside it to grow. It has everything is there. So it's not, sometimes we say we're giving students voice or choice. They have choice and voice. It's the conditions that we need to establish in order to allow them to truly be able to access that and use it in a way that is empowering and engaging. So we start with our youth as recipients, that seed. The idea is that the conditions would still be right for that seed, that the soil would be nurturing, that the sun would be shining with a perspective of youth voice and agency, that's the environment in which the seed is starting to mature. When the youth is looked at when we look at the youth as a seed or the youth as recipient, one would hope that the adults are informing and or directing youth, but ideally, they're actively listening to the young people in which they work with. Sorry, been talking all day.
Mm-hmm.
So in that scenario, that's kind of what we think of often when we think of most school settings, is that young people are in more of a passive role where they're, the direction and the information is coming from the adult. And the hope is that we can move along this continuum. So in many places we see lots of really great examples of youth as consultants. In this idea, the adults are actively seeking and considering opinions of youth in learning and decision making. So that might look like coming up, starting a unit with collecting questions from young people. Often the negotiated curriculum model and thinking about how the questions could tie into the existing framework of the design that is being created by the adult, or might be surveying young people after a lesson to get feedback and then having that inform the next day's instruction or the end of a unit. So that's really a helpful practice in getting that feedback and involving young people in a way where they can see that their ideas and input are a part of the process. But as we move further along from seedling to sapling, we think of what would it look like if youth and adults were emerging partners. And that's where this tree is starting to really mature in the idea that youth and adults are actively participating in decision making and learning, but the process potentially is initiated by the adult. So that might be like, okay, we've got, we're coming together as a group to think about the school schedule, and I want to make sure I have youth and adults present, and the adult is initiating that group because there's a need to really think about the schedule and how it's addressing the needs of young people. So it might be initiated by the adult, but then coming together as equal partners to think about decision making. Finally, when we get to full partnership, we're thinking about this mature tree. At the roots are respect and trust and equity, which creates a strong trunk, where there's shared voice, shared power, and responsibility. And the outcomes are that the learning, leadership, and teaching should look transformed, should be reimagined, because youth and adults are truly in an equitable relationship where there is shared voice, power, and responsibility. And we've added the fruits as the fruit of that tree would be that youth are empowered to be agents of change and active, engaged members of their community. So this is a way in which a continuum, knowing that there's all different times where we're in various places. We were just exploring that today, this continuum. But the first thing is that we really need to explore our own thinking around the roles of youth and adults in schools. And that change, that paradigm shift, that change in mental models has to happen first before you can think about power dynamics, communication and collaboration, and shared responsibility and decision making. So I think I'll stop there as far as the what it is, students as partners, and maybe we can move back into thinking about, okay, so what might that look like in practice? I can go back to the whys maybe later on, because that was a lot of me talking. What say you, other participants of PLP Pathways, about this model?
I could dive in. I love I just, as you were talking about this, I'm thinking about our own that sustainability group committees that we have going on, and made me think like, wow, we have 16 committees, so I feel like are each in some way on a different part of that spectrum. And as I was listening to you talk about and explain it, it makes total sense. And one thing that came to mind is, I think one thing we're grappling with a little bit. We have a couple groups who I feel like are at that youth and adults as emerging partners, and them kind of getting close to becoming full partners, but their partners are struggling with recognizing them as such, and are still like sending us emails saying, hey, can we just have time to meet with the adults and touch base? And I'm like, the students are really in charge of this. Like, they're doing a great job. I've been CC'd on the message, but for some of these people who I just aren't in education, they're like, no, like we want to touch base with the adult and as the authority, when really we're, for us, like the students made their own committees, they designed, their own programs, they're the ones that have been making phone calls and emails. And I feel like some adults that we've been, and this isn't everybody, but just I think a couple organizations that we've been working with, that doesn't feel safe for them still. So I think it's, we're in that tricky spot of like, how do we work with them to have them see our, middle schoolers as these full partners, not just, here's something we're giving the kids to do, because that's absolutely not how we view it at all. So that's, it just got me my wheels turning on that a little bit. And I'd love to hear ideas or opinions on that.
Well, Kevin, I think one of the issues that I'm seeing that's related to that a little bit, and this is a question I would have for Lindsay too, is you were talking about mental models. And I, like you, I'm running into a lot of mental models where people feel that students' voice or their opinions, they're not valuing them to the extent that I'd like to see them valued. So, one question out there is, what does high quality instruction look like in the classroom, right? And my proposal would be, well, why aren't we asking kids? By the time they get into 8th grade, they've had 9-10 years of experience. And you would think that they would have a pretty good idea of what makes a positive learning environment and what's going to make them successful. But the mental model, I think, is still, we're the adults, we're the experts, and we'll make those decisions. So I guess in addition to Lindsay's question, I would just pose, how do you start changing systemically how people are incorporating student voice, not only just into your classroom, but into some of the larger decisions that are happening in the school? And what are the, how do you do that so that student voice is valued and that you can develop into those partnerships?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I really appreciate this framework, because it really breaks down sort of what the different sort of ways that we, sort of the trajectory of partnering with youth. And I think, as Kevin and Don are sharing, it really makes me think about how important this conversation is in conjunction with thinking about equity and power structures within schools, and really thinking about what is the role of a teacher. And I also think that we're really seeing the role of the teacher shifting a lot. And it also makes me think about the areas in my own practice where I would see that youth adult emerging partnerships. Oftentimes it was not necessarily a part of core instruction from my experience. It would be a group of students who were engaged in a project or, a subgroup or a committee. And it really has me wondering about what a classroom would look like as a full partner. And I love the idea of a seed, because every student is a seed. And so, every student should have that opportunity to have a youth adult partnership, and that should be their experience. And so really thinking about, like, who are the students that we're partnering with, and then sort of unpacking that as we think about our practices.
One of the conversations that we were having earlier today was around this idea of, even when our intentions are there to involve students in the process, as the adult, we may not always be super clear on how we're communicating that with either the students or like Kev, with the learning partners that we're involving in the process. And it just makes me think about how do we go about communicating that narrative to the players involved? Is it with students, like, let's put together our pitch, or here's or as the educators involved, like, here's where we're at, and this is our intention moving forward, so that we're just so transparent about this partnership is really critical. And it's like that accountability, right? Like, we want we want the youth to have a say to keep us accountable in the partnership, and we want to keep the kids accountable too, right? A partnership is both sides kind of moving the group forward, I think.
Lindsay, can I just
Sure.
offer something? So,
Yeah.
I think the only person I don't know, is it Mary?
Mora.
Mora.
Sorry, I just thought M. Sorry, Mora. So when you asked that question about, the community partners who are wanting to talk to you as the adult, I think one of the things that we've seen be really successful in schools is when they're with a meeting with all community partners to sort of say, this is our philosophy of learning, so that they can sort of, and it could be obviously adults talking to adults, but it also could be youth and adults talking to the adult community partners. Because Lindsay was talking about setting up the conditions for all seeds to kind of move towards being full trees. And I think part of that condition setting is supporting the adults who aren't typically educators. And even truthfully, if they are educators, they may not have that mental model that sees adults as potential learning partners. And I think if I were to journey my last 17 years at Shelburne Farms, I might have been the person who was seeing them as like consultants more. And it took kids teaching me truthfully that they were full partners, because the first time I did a community project with kids, they had this idea that I thought was really terrible. I was like, that is so not going to work. And it was the most epic, amazing project. And all of the community members thanked me. And I was like, truthfully, I had nothing to do. I was so humbled. I had nothing to do with it. I actually think I was a barrier to their success. They would have been more successful if I had gotten out of their way. And it was like, okay, I had that moment. I had that whack on the side of the head. But most other adults, especially community partners, don't get to see that full learning process and really get to see the potential that all students have. So we started doing community partner nights and inviting them to come to school so that they could better understand what their role was and how we plan to interact and how we saw the kids as full partners. And it could be fun if you've had community partners that have been really successful working with students, talk about some of their strategies.
So, thank you, Jen. I appreciate that a lot, because we have people coming in from the community on a regular basis, and they've slowly figured it out, as you were saying, because they've had exposure to the kids sort of over a long period of time, and we've built up relationships. But Lindsay, I also just grabbed the Vermont Learning for the Future, those rubrics that they have, and they have that rubric for youth governance, which kind of talks about some of these things. They just have a rubric, what it looks like. And I just feel like we need to get that in front of more people. And it's just amazing to me that of all the places, schools are still not capitalizing on the students who are in their building and what the possibilities are, like you were saying. And I would agree too with Mora. I really like that framework of the seed to sapling, that idea. But I guess I would just wonder, do you have exercises or activities where you can ask people to challenge their mental models, and what does that look like?
Yes, and before that I share that, I would just say that set of rubrics that Don just referenced, they are actually, there's 6 different rubrics, I believe, and they're all around youth adult partnership. So what does it look like when these what we know as really promising practices in schools, like youth governance, integrated curriculum, restorative practices, learner-teacher feedback, advisory, and I might be forgetting one, but community partnerships.
There's a community partnership. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, community partnerships. What would it look like when youth adult partnership is the through line through all of that, and equity is a through line? So what is the thing? What should it look like in a school that, like, let's say restorative practices? How do we know when youth adult partnership is a through line, and how do we know when equity is a through line? So I would definitely encourage everyone to take a peek at those, or, you know, a tool just to, as a self-assessment, and to just kind of see where you're at. And then Don, you said, are there exercises or resources? And what I would say is, you know, something that we often do is, I mean, this idea of partnership, I think sometimes the word partnership's used in a way that truly isn't partnership. So that's not one piece, is really learning how to define what partnership really is. And we always start, one thing that we start with is just kind of like getting to like, having folks find their why and what they connect with around like why we need to be thinking about our relationships differently. Because it really comes down to relationship. We can, you know, it's like, what, again, it's those conditions. What are the conditions that we are creating inside our school buildings to ensure that everyone feels connected, a sense of belonging, safety, and not, you know, with every, you know, with their both adults and youth. And so it starts with that relationship and shifting that piece, and that requires a lot of your own work, I think, as an educator. Like, who am I as an individual? Who am I as an educator? What do I believe about my role as an educator? What do I believe, you know? So doing some of that, and then doing that work around your mental models. Like, what do I believe about youth, and their role, and what do I believe about adults in a building? And starting to challenge the some of those messages that we create about what young people can and cannot do. One exercise that we often use is with the fully mature tree at the end of that continuum, is we have groups, youth and adults, together think about the roots and the trunk elements. Like, so we've got the three root characteristics: equity, respect, and trust. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Trust? Okay, let's see if I really, and then the trunk with shared voice, responsibility, and power.
Power. What is power?
Okay. Don't have it in front of me, but that's, you know, I should know at this point. Shared voice, responsibility, and power. Got it. We have them look at those 6 different attributes, thinking about, okay, what's a strength already that exists in our space, in our learning community, and where's an area that we really need to focus in on. And once that area, you can hone in on what it is that is a strength, like starting to build off of your strengths. Maybe there's a, you know, people, it's a really respectful learning environment, but maybe there's not a lot of shared responsibility. You know, it's very much one-sided. Mm-hmm. And so, how can we start to shift that? What would that look like? And those are the exercises. Like, it has to be youth and adults together, mm-hmm. having those conversations. What could it look like? What are the possibilities? What are our opportunities? And where do we begin? Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I imagine too, then that must come, like, as a classroom teacher, you need to do that work up front in your space. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I understand that certainly in relation to like community partners and mm-hmm. working with adults outside, but I would think it needs to start somehow in our classrooms, or as a team, right? So that kids are seeing that this isn't just like an isolated space, but that, you know, as a level or as a team, mm-hmm. this is what we value. Because I think it can be difficult if it's like happening in one place in one situation, and then they get very different messages in another. Right. And so how does a level, or how does a school start to build that culture?
Yeah, and agree. Right. So there might be there's always pockets. Right. You know, there's always pockets. If you were to do like analysis of any school, there's pockets in every single stage, you know, and it moves, people are kind of fluid too, but there are definitely pockets of this partnership. And I think one thing is to engage young people and their adult partners in thinking about this exact question. What could it look like? What are the possibilities? And then from there, ensuring that everyone has a stake in it, like collecting information, having dialogues with folks about what are their needs, what are their desires, what do they see, what do they feel, using that data to then, drive action. So then everyone has had a chance to share their perspective, their voice, their ideas, and that is what's driving the change. Because when change is just happening in the small, like there might be this one teacher who has this, group that's doing these, really great projects or whatever, and then that becomes an issue of equity. So why is that adult and those youth, why are they having this equitable practice when others might not be engaged in that kind of equitable practices? So it becomes an issue around equity. And, I think it starts with really exploring so many, I don't know where you begin because there's so many different levels of where you could begin, but you could just start anywhere. The first thing is checking your own self, your mental models, and like, what do you believe? And then it's like, you could look at anything. You could look at the master schedule. You could look at your curriculum. You could look at field trips. You could look at anything through this idea of partnership and start to really explore how it could, look really different and reimagine it.
Lindsay, I just want to reinforce
Yes.
something that you had shared in the conversation earlier in our program. We were asking about the developmental readiness for students. At what grade level can students become partners? And Lindsay reminded us that her daughter, as a 3-year-old, was engaged in a program where she was a partner in a way that was developmentally appropriate. And I think how powerful that could be if we were all on board as a school community, as an education community. So we don't have to, at middle school or whenever we meet kids, have them reframe what they think learning looks like, whether it's a passive experience or an active partnership where that trust is already the foundation. So I'm just intrigued by that piece. Of course, even at middle school, if we're all on the same page, that's helpful, but wouldn't it be even greater if we started younger?
Right.
Like always.
Yes.
The system supported that.
Right. Yeah. And that's such an interesting piece because you have to unlearn all these behaviors. If we're waiting until some young person's 11 or 12 or 13 or 14 to start working in a different kind of relationship, then how do you unlearn all those patterns and behaviors? And it's also easier we were talking earlier about, it's really easy to be a recipient of, a recipient in the process and not and be in a more passive role than to be in a really active role and actively engaged in the learning, especially if that's the pattern that, young people have been in for a lot of the early years. And so, yes, to echo what Wendy said, we had a nice discussion about developmentally, what would that look like, partnership at all different stages. And obviously it needs to look different. That doesn't mean that you cannot have partnership until someone's young adolescent, like that. It doesn't mean like when you hit young adolescence, you are ready for partnership. It's, it's just like really thinking about our relationships in schools they're so artificial compared to our relationships outside of school. It's this just really bizarre thing. Like other parts of everyone's life, you don't have these strange, power dynamics and when you think about different relationships that young people might have with adults outside of a school setting, they're probably going to look quite different, and so it's just such a strange structure that we've put into place as far as power dynamics and who holds the decision-making responsibility, who doesn't, who has voice, or who has the opportunity to use their voice and who does not have that opportunity. And
It cascades through the system.
Totally cascades through the system.
And I think what Wendy was saying, like we think students kind of have to learn, early on this opportunity that they have to engage as full partners in learning. But I think it goes even further back because it's just a system that reinforces over time. So the teacher has their K-12 and then higher ed experience that then is brought into a school system. So it's not even just unlearning potentially in middle school what didn't happen in elementary school, but it's the teacher also unlearning like 16 years of their own experience of being potentially a passive learner.
Mm-hmm.
And then typically people who follow that system really well and thrive in it become teachers.
Yes.
So they often are like naturally reinforcing a system that was not designed for equity.
Exactly.
So it's like it makes you think about teacher preparation programs and how passive learners are in that system as well.
And even in higher education, right? Like, I mean, if you think about your undergraduate experience, there are so many different experiences where I was just being fed information and regurgitating. So, it's like when is it going to change? I mean, it's got to change in pockets, right? So like, it's not we want it to be systemic, but it might have to start with that one or two people that are holding that space and then, but also sharing the successes of what's happening in that space in a way that engages the community in dialogue in a positive way that doesn't feel like, I'm trying to think of the word right now. My brain's kind of dead. Like ruffling someone's feathers, like,
That's not, you mean
like that we're all on this like continuum as learners, and that when we can share the successes of, what it looks like when partnership happens, I don't think, would it be great if a school went to a complete change and like, that's not going to happen. Like, that's just not reality. Just like Jen said, like we are all part of the same system that has perpetuated these inequitable practices and, opportunities for forever. And so how it has to happen in small pockets, and that's what, has to start somewhere, whether it's in your classroom, whether it's on your team, whether it's a small group of interested youth and adults that want to take something on. That's the only way it's going to, spread.
Hey, Lindsay, I have just a kind of a follow-up question. And so like, if I was a teacher and I was like, oh, my mental model is, I totally agree with, I'm feeding kids information, they're passive. I want to get them to be more active and engaged. Is there like and I know it's hard to pinpoint, but one of the notes that I wrote down is like, what skills can you be developing in your classroom to sort of foster this? Because I think what happens is a lot of teachers say, oh, I want to get to the tree part, but I'm missing the growth, of like the sapling and the development and that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering if, for people out there who are, like me, I'm saying, geez, what are the mental models that I have right now? Because I feel like I'm not having enough student voice. So what are the skills that I could be teaching like now in my current situation, and how do I grow that out? And I know that Jen has worked with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and I know Kevin's done that too, like where you start building independence, and Lindsay and everybody. And I just wonder if you have like suggestions for teachers about how they could kind of, move up the ladder sort of to get to the tree part of it, like simple concrete steps that they can take to start building these skills.
Yeah.
And growth.
Yeah. I mean, I think you just named some of those. Like, so for instance, something like if you really want to shift the relationship and really focus in on that, like thinking deeply about restorative practices and what would that look like it's all built on equity of voice and it's an equitable practice. And what does that look like when, that's part of, every person's experience in a building every day, and not just a circle practice. I'm talking about like the way in which we communicate with each other and the way we build community. So that would be around relationships. If you're thinking about like powerful pedagogical practices that get at that, then like project-based learning, right? I mean, that is, if it is looked at in a way that can truly be shifted to a partnership model, like Kevin was just describing, then that's a really powerful pedagogical practice that, and so really starting to look at what is project-based learning, what are some different examples, like, well, maybe we can hear more from Kevin and Meg and Wendy, and we can even share maybe we had Burketown was here on today as well, and what they're doing around the sustainable development goals and project-based learning, where they're truly, the youth have a very active role in deciding what and how they're going to explore in that time frame and around the sustainable development goals. So project-based learning, restorative practices.
Well, I was just thinking when Don was saying that, I'm thinking about like having a thoughtful PLP process.
Yes.
If you're doing PLPs the right way, students are reflecting and advocating for themselves nonstop, and that, they're seeing themselves as agents of change and having their voice be heard and considered. So, as you were saying that, Don, I'm like, wow, that takes me back to like, how are we teaching our kids to be reflective? How are we teaching them, about finding evidence for their growth and doing it in a respectful manner and being able to advocate for their needs and what they need to be successful. And those are all skills I feel like, we do a lot of teaching with. You can do with an advisory. That's not just like an academic skill, but one of those, soft skills that we're working on all the time.
Yeah, I think that's you just like nailed that piece. Like personalized learning is not about someone going off and doing their thing by themselves. It's about, that's partnership at its core, is around like the role of, like youth and adults working really closely together and having a powerful reflection practice and setting goals and it being meaningful and purposeful. And I think that is number one. that could be, you could just choose what your driver is, is it personalized learning? Is it personalized learning and project-based learning together? Is it whatever it is? We know those are the practices that get at a deeper relationship, a change and a shift in the relationship.
I also wanted to mention, I think those are really great pieces and so important. And I also want to come back to the questions that you shared at the beginning, Lindsay, about helping teachers to really wonder about their why, and really considering, like, if you're thinking about how do I begin with this, or even I'm on the journey, I need to maybe think about where I am, asking those questions. Who am I as an educator? And then what do I believe about students and learning? And as teams, really grappling with that throughout the process, because I think it helps to examine, some potential areas for growth too. So, sometimes I think it can feel overwhelming of like, where do I begin? But even by asking those questions, it's like the foundation for big steps.
Yeah. Yes.
I was just going to say that I think also that our kids are asking us to do that, because I think we're seeing that more and more our kids are not thriving in the systems that we have in place. And they're telling us pretty clearly in lots of different ways that this isn't working for me and I need something different. And when we see examples of kids feeling empowered, I love, Kev, that you brought in the like a really thriving PLP process, because that's so valid to each individual. And so if we can help all kids see themselves as viable, empowered, reflective learners, then it makes sense that the next step would be for them to, or that in conjunction with that, maybe not next, but alongside that is, and I'm partners with my teacher, or I'm partners with my peers, I'm partners in my community. And I think we're at a critical point where we need to do it. Like, I don't think it's, it's urgent. It's not just, oh, would this be pie in the sky? I think we're seeing teachers that are struggling with behaviors. They're feeling frustrated, and it's not across the board, but I think that's a real concern for teachers. And I think we're at a point where we need to do something different.
Hey, Lindsay, I just also want to mention, or to everybody, something you mentioned earlier in the, and that's part of one of the rubrics, is this idea of the the Vermont Learning for the Future rubrics, they talk a lot about feedback, like setting up good feedback systems to build relationships. And I just think that that's a really important thing that teachers can be doing to help with their practice. And you mentioned like gathering feedback at the end of a lesson or at the end of a unit. And I think it's not just the feedback though, it's how we respond to the feedback and sharing that response, those responses with the kids, and then having respectful conversations about them to help change our practice. Because I mean, this is, the things that stick in your mind, but sometimes I have these reporters' notebooks and I'll have these conversations. And I was having a conversation about feedback and I was asking a student, well, don't all your teachers, listen to your feedback? And they're like, yeah, well, you're the only one who writes it down, And I think when kids see you responding in that way, either writing it down or sharing the data or shifting your practice based on something they've suggested or something they've seen, I think that's one of the small steps that teachers can do to start building agency for students, but also I think that gives you insight into your practice. When you talked about, the other thing about seeds though, as you mentioned in your metaphor, is that seeds are kind of a hard to crack. You don't see what's inside of them, right? And so you don't know what's inside or what they can turn into unless you really delve into that in a thoughtful way. And feedback in multiple different ways and the reflection that goes with that, both from the teacher and the student, I think can be a really great way of seeing what kids have to offer and the insights that they have. And so, again, I think what Meg is saying about, kids not thriving and seeing these behaviors and seeing kids who are stressed out and maybe not very happy with the way that schools are working, organizing your feedback and developing reflective practices around that, as Kevin and Meg mentioned, can be very helpful to get people on that pathway to incorporating student, empowerment and agency in their classrooms.
Agree. So, just looking at our time frame here, I'm wondering if we want to take some questions from the field. Okay.
Yes.
So do you feel like it's time for questions from the field?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Maura. Because I think, maybe what we had previewed this webinar as, there's a lot that was here, but we could spend a long time talking about a negotiated curriculum process, but what it really comes down to is it's not about the thing. Like, there might have been a process that I used when I was working with the kids in the Edge. There's a process, like the Alpha Team, Swift. There's all these different ways in which we go about working with kids, but the fundamental piece is that we're shifting the way that we are working with young people. We can name it whatever we want, but I don't think we need to get into, I think it's helpful for folks to know like the what, but again, I think, first we have to really figure out our why is what Maura was saying. So we have some questions from the field, and one says, how do we get buy-in from administrators, or how do administrators get buy-in from teachers? Anybody want to take that one on?
So,
go ahead, Don.
No, after you, Jen.
I was gonna say I immediately had a thought about that question, and I think if we could use the word like build in rather than buy-in, and it shifts the way that the question is framed, because I know when someone is trying to sell me something, I don't want it immediately.
Exactly.
It's like I have an aversion to like sales of things, because it's like, oh, I don't want that. If you're trying to sell it to me, I don't want it. So I think it's a question around like, how do we build this together? How do we create the conditions, teachers, administrators, students, for this type of work to happen? And I think there's a fair amount of co-creation in order to make it happen, because like you're not, if you don't have that mental model and you don't actually have a process that matches that mental model, like where an administrator is like telling teachers like you have to buy into this, like if you really don't and you don't have the time to like understand your why, or gain relationship with your colleagues, your administrator, your students, then it is just buy-in. And then as soon as that person who's making you do it, whether it's teacher to administrator or administrator to teacher or student class to class, it doesn't have staying power. It doesn't endure over time.
Right.
One of the things that I wanted to, and I think I had mentioned this, is you have to be a proponent for this type of thing. And I've already probably this year said, well, are we systematically collecting student feedback on these changes that are happening in our school? Or how are we collecting student voice on this? Or another way I've stated it is, when are we going to have students at the table, for these meetings, right? And I guess it's hard for me to understand where it kind of gets brushed off. I'm getting brushed off a lot on having students participate in some of our decision-making processes. And I'm just not sure how to correct that. Like, I'm not sure how to show up with kids, it's just, and I guess for me, it's just a frustration because what kids are capable of, and how they can be productively shaping the community at school. And we're supposed to be teaching all these kids about citizenship and participatory democracy, and we're not giving them chances to do that. And for me, that's just sort of this thorny issue that keeps coming up. And, they put a student, if you have a hiring committee, they'll put a student on that. But otherwise, we give them no practice. What does it even mean to sit on an interview? What does it mean to participate in some of these forums and formats? And how do we provide them the opportunities to do that? And here's the other thing. It's not just your best kids who are your most articulate, but what about the equity piece? What about the kids who aren't doing really well in school? Shouldn't their voices be at the table too? And shouldn't they be saying, well, this is why I feel this is unfair, or this is why I feel like I'm not being treated the right way at school? And I don't think we're, it's just one of those things where I just keep asking the question. I was at a staff meeting the other day. Are we collecting student voices? And that's one way, I guess, of doing it. But I'm not really sure that it can be frustrating. And so how do you manage that? Or what are some ways that I can actually show administrators that this is something that's possible? So I don't know, that's just my rant for a little bit, because it's really frustrating, especially when you know what students are capable of.
Yeah, I think keep asking those questions is really important, because we can get worn down and eventually stop asking that question, and then it just becomes back to the status quo. And in your own setting where you are able to have, some of your, some say in the design of your day and in your classroom, well, I would just continue doing what is right, and what your purpose is. And that will eventually, it's still going, it's going to spread. It might just take time, but if you keep posing that question, even if it feels like you're being ignored, I think if you don't ask the question, who's going to ask the question?
Right. And I actually just, while I'm thinking about this, I do want to say, I do have a little bit of a seed going, is where I've had kids from the high school who are involved in CBLs and work-based learning. They've come and they've presented their experiences to my students, and they've done that through their PLP process. And so I'm actually now in the process of having my second or third meeting with the Flexible Pathways coordinator at the Montpelier High School. And she really understands what these students are capable of. And then I'm having the students come and talk to my students. And so then, for example, when the high school counselors come to start the transition process, I'm telling the kids, you better start asking about the community-based learning and being advocates. So I guess just one way of showing that this is possible is by having older kids come down and be maybe mentors, or to show examples of how it's happening at the next level. And then building up the pressure so that we need to prepare our kids for what's happening at the next level. And then in doing that, start to build agency of the kids.
I was just going to mention about sort of how do we build this, or, if we're practitioners and we're asking these questions and we're not necessarily feeling heard, the power in bringing the rubrics out. It creates that third point. So it's not like because I think student voice is important. It creates more of a process of the team to say, this is what is believed to be best practice. Let's take an analysis of how we're doing. Let's all sort of assess ourselves and then set a next step goal or something and sort of say, like, where are we right now? And then sort of move forward and build from there. Because I think, you know, being that one voice that's asking can be so challenging. And so thinking about what are those resources and where are those tools that we can use to evaluate our programming can be so helpful, both for a team and for a whole system.
Yeah. I wonder also about families.
Mm-hmm.
This is, you know, how do we ensure that all stakeholders truly, you know, there's communication to everyone about around why this relationship should look different. And that when, you know, that it's not a teacher that's deciding they're not going to do their job, you know, like they're like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, so I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to let them do this. That it's about, you know, like what's the why, you know, and how do we engage families in this kind of learning so that they can be an advocate for school change and reimagining what this could look like. And I know we only have a couple more minutes, so I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I know I always like to quote the law. Just I come from before teaching like a justice place, legally speaking, and Act 77. I feel like it's pretty clear that personalizing and flexible pathways and giving kids the tools to be good citizens and learners is pretty powerful.
Yes.
And I think helping to educate people into at least what I think that means, or what maybe their interpretation of that is. But I think Act 77 is a powerful tool too.
Agreed.
It's law.
Yeah, we have proof of policy. Like it's right here. We don't have to even like, it's not that we're just what we believe. It's like, it's right there in the policy. Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Wendy, for that. Anything else folks are thinking?
Well, I think about like the middle school is not a building, or this we believe. Like there's documents that are out there that, you know, are foundational for middle level practice. And I think, you know, just in revisiting them recently, it was like, oh my gosh, why isn't this part of why isn't this part of our regular conversations at school, or conversations with the administrator, or then, hey families, this is, you know, even if it's not living anywhere outside of like, maybe it's on our webpage, but it's just like, we reference these practices because this is what our profession deems important and necessary.
Yeah. So with a few minutes left here, there are some really great things happening that I think, and opportunities for folks who are out there and all of our listeners out there, some things happening in the near future that would be really supportive of moving forward with this work. And one is happening next week on Wednesday. It's a free event. It's Vermont Learning for the Future, the Winter Summit. It's at the Capitol Plaza in Montpelier. If you go to vtlff.org, there's a place where you can register. Again, it's free. It's getting really full too, and the day is really shaping up to be incredibly powerful. With a morning, the morning is a youth facilitated youth panel, and then two workshop sessions that mostly are youth facilitated or co-facilitated around some youth activism work and powerful practices that are happening in schools. And then the afternoon is some time for some working time for some different design work with different committees that people can jump in on and join in. And it's a network of folks from all over the state that are trying to think about all these things, you know, that we were just talking about and more. So highly recommend that. March 12th. February 12th. Youth are co-facilitating the day, yes, and it's February 12th, not March 12th. But a month later is another great opportunity. You want to talk about
Sure,
it?
the family conference is happening at Champlain College. This is an opportunity for students to come to the conference as a team and to listen to workshops around changing the culture in their schools. We have some incredible workshops scheduled. Mostly youth facilitated. The registration form's on the VAMLY.org website. It's ready to go. We just added a new workshop. This would be great for you to sign up, get ready for that. It's always an incredible day.
What else is happening out there in BT?
Just a shout out for the Middle Grades Institute, June 22nd to June 26th at Champlain College. Registration is open for that at the Middle Grades Collaborative. And I know there's a bunch of great workshops happening over the next 2 months. VAMLY is a big highlight, the Vermont Future of Learning. I thought there was equity workshop. I think we have, isn't there an online equity class?
Yeah.
Or is that already, did that pass by? Because I know that there were some online resources that were really good.
Yeah, and
happening as
Gorski's
well.
coming. There's a workshop in March, I believe.
Yeah.
I know I registered for that one. It looks exceptional. It's about like really systemic change and like, so I think it would be a really powerful one. I think it's through the Vermont Higher Ed Collaborative if people are looking for that one. And then Shelburne Farms has a ton of awesome things happening for professional learning as well.
Mostly starting in the summer.
Mostly in the summer. And Cultivating Pathways for Sustainability has a year-long, is now a year-long opportunity for currently adult learners. Next year, we're going to take it to a youth-adult partnership model. And so stay tuned. There'll be our May celebration. And I know Kevin's team will be part of that as well. And then we'll start another year of learning.
Jen and Lindsay, I just have a question about that, the year-long partnership. When is the application or when does that come up? You know, when is the opening for that so that people can know when to start looking for that?
Probably like spring, like after May, June is when we'll start thinking about next year after we finish this year. But yes, be on the lookout. This was really our pilot year of making it year long and really psyched about growing it as well.
And that would be, you're looking for adult teacher student teams. Would that be right for next year?
Yeah, that's
okay.
the goal for next year.
Okay.
How are you?
Oh yeah, okay.
By the way, Meg and Wendy are part of that. Yes. Meg wasn't sure if she was.
Sure.
She is.
Just checking.
And with that said, it's 4:32.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody again. Jen and Wendy, thank you very much. I know you've had a long day. Lindsay, Meg, Kevin, and Maura. Maura's going on a big trip tomorrow. Maura, we hope you have great, safe travels.
Where are you going?
To Japan.
Oh my gosh, that's right. Wow.
That's awesome. So I hope everybody stays warm and dry in the next couple days. And thank you so much for contributing. Lindsay, thank you so much for hosting. Really appreciate it. Hope everybody has a safe drive home. Thank you very much. And again, thanks to the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for supporting this work. Have a good evening, everybody, and thank you so much.